Hi everyone, this is Emmanuel for the Classical Drunks. Recording with me today is Aaron. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm good, Manny. It's a nice day out.
Yes,
Typical
it is.
gloomy weather.
Typical, yeah, a non-typical Irish weather in a sense because, we do see sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
So today's conversation is a bit of a tangent to what we were talking about last time because we were talking about the French election. If you haven't listened to that podcast yet, I recommend you to do so, obviously. And we were discussing afterwards a bit, trying to compare a bit how the electoral systems work in Ireland versus France. And Ireland has quite a interesting voting system, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about it. Spoiler alert, if you're Irish, you probably are familiar with quite a few of those concepts, so maybe that's not going to be the most interesting podcast to you. This is primarily intended to for people who don't know much about the Irish system. But anyway, so it's called the simple transferable vote. Single transferable vote.
Yes.
Sorry. Can you just tell us what it is about?
So the single transferable vote is slightly different into the way that which most democracies would have a voting system. Most democracies would use a first past the post system. Most of you guys out there will probably be familiar with this because it's probably the system that you guys would use in your local countries. So you go out, you see a big list of candidates in the polling booth, and you tick your favorite one, and then that person is represented as your vote. In Ireland, what we do is we have our single transferable voting system, where we actually rank the candidates based on our favourite to our least favourite. Or you don't have to rank them all, you can just rank a few. And then after that, the ones you don't like, you don't mark their box with anything. So you literally rank them.
Yeah, so that's interesting because you literally get a grid.
You get a preference, you get a list of preferences.
Yeah, because usually you'd get an empty envelope, and you have, if there are 5 candidates, 5 papers, each paper has the name on it, you pick one, put it in an envelope.
Yeah.
You have a grid with each name and a little empty box, and you literally just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
As far down as you want to go.
Yeah.
And if you just want to vote for one candidate, you can just write one.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Okay.
So what this manages to do is it manages to, like we just said, rank preference of candidates. This is useful because if, for example, the candidate you like the most doesn't get in, your vote is still counted, no matter what. As long as you number all of the boxes, even if you do that, your vote will always be counted. That's what the great thing about single transferable vote is, rather than the first past the post system. Whereas if you, let's say, if you're in the United States of America, you vote for a libertarian candidate, you've kind of wasted your vote. Not to be mean to the libertarians out there, but you kind of have. You don't get to
send a signal, Aaron. We've sent a message.
You've sent a message, which nobody really cares about. Nobody really heard. I'm sorry, libertarians, but you've wasted your vote. But this is the best thing. This is why libertarians, and I think that libertarians in the States are pushing for a single transferable vote system. Is that, let's say, you vote for your very small candidate who you think is awesome, and you give him 1. Okay, he doesn't get through because he's not popular. He is eliminated from the round because he has the lowest number. He is eliminated from the round of voting because he doesn't have enough votes. In that case, the person counting the ballot will go to your second option and give your vote to the second preference candidate. Okay, and it will be get added to his group. So this
until the outcome is selected.
Until the candidate is selected.
So the second last then is discarded, the vote gets redistributed, etc., until we get to the final outcome.
So this way, everyone's vote counts towards the end. Usually we combine this with having multiple candidates in a voting area. So, for example, in the States, I know they divide their voting areas into districts for each state. In Ireland, we would just have the state, I guess, the county or whatever, unless it's a very large population. We would have like the county, and it would be then divided based on how many candidates need to fill that county. So you might have 5 people who can get elected, and so the top 5 most popular with the highest preferences will get in.
So so in that case, we're talking about electing. Let's say we're trying to fill up a parliament. So it's not for voting for the next president, or in the case of Ireland, the next prime minister. Yeah, so in that case, you're saying here's a given geographical area. That area in the parliament will have, let's say, 5 elected officials, and so that ranking would pick up the 5 for the given area.
Exactly. Yeah. So, so basically, it's more representative, which is brilliant. Another issue is that it gets rid of the ideas of primaries. The primaries aren't necessary under this system because as many candidates can run as they want. For example, it's not. I hate to bring back the states again, but it's the kind of the concept that everyone understands. In the states, you have primaries. So we've seen in this year we had Donald Trump elected as the Republican primary candidate, and we had Hillary Clinton elected as the Democrat primary candidate. In an STV voting system, all the candidates would have just run. And they would have been ranked.
Would have been
on the day of
because,
voting. Yeah. So basically, you're eliminating primaries. They're not necessary under the system. Yeah. The citizenry only have to vote once, which is great. This also means that you're getting a more representative sample from your population because, as we've seen, a lot of the Bernie people didn't end up coming out and voting for Hillary because they wanted to vote for Bernie. Had they come out, we might have seen a very different, under STV, had they come out, we might have seen a very different outcome because they might have given Hillary their second vote, you know? So it could have really shook up the presidential election over there. And it would have been more representative as well, maybe.
Well, especially because both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were the most disliked candidates of American history of politics. Yeah. So it would have been interesting to have other candidates given maybe a fair shot, and say, well, even inside the Republican camps, a lot of Republicans were saying Donald Trump is not a great character, but he's the Republican guy. Yeah. So I gotta give him my vote. So maybe they would have preferred someone else. Maybe they were, the crazy religious lunatics would have preferred Huckabee. Yeah. And say first Huckabee, second Trump.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it gives the smaller candidates a better chance of beating out the Donald. I guess it would have. In all fairness, Donald was a kind of a force to be reckoned with, but he was still the most unliked Republican candidate that they have ever fielded. I think someone said. I can't remember. I read that somewhere.
What I mean, yes, so both were. So it was really a contest of trying to find a word, dislikability.
I still think Hillary would have gotten it though because the Democrats managed to field such a small number of candidates. I only think they had 3 in their Democratic convention, didn't they?
And they started with 4, if I remember correctly, and 2 dropped. Yeah.
So I think we still would have had Hillary, but maybe we wouldn't have had Trump. But yeah. So first thing, we would have get rid of primaries under STV. They're a waste of time. They just require people to vote.
And a waste of money.
And a waste of money. And they require people to vote basically twice. And it also leads to ideological purification because you're only allowing the party members to essentially vote rather than the general public. Yes. So next, it's much more better representation as we've stated. Because people get to rank preferences. It just leads to a more accurate outcome rather than people having to kind of pick a big party who they think will have a choice of winning. This kind of gets into the idea of strategic voting, which is really bad. You shouldn't. This is something I admire about the actual small parties in the States that still manage to survive. That people really do believe in those kind of their politics of that party, like the Libertarians, for example, or the Greens. They vote for them despite knowing that their vote's kind of worthless.
And it's we see that panning up right now in France because if you look at the first round that just took place, Macron was ahead. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the fine print of the polls, they were essentially saying that Macron was a bit of a vote by default because people were not necessarily pleased with the other candidates, and that you were just saying kind of a strategic vote to make sure that other crazies, such as Le Pen, wouldn't win.
Mm-hmm.
So Macron does not enjoy the kind of support that other candidates did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So actually, just mentioning there as well, comparing STV to the France system, France kind of does have, in a weird way, a very light version of STV because they have rounds of voting. If you think of STV as multiple rounds of voting, except you're doing all your votes at one time through your preference ranking.
It is, but as you said, you have
you
have strategic votes, especially what has happened in 2002, the first time that the National Front was this second round. It's because a lot of the left votes were spread across other candidates, so it wasn't really. Let's put it this way: if there were that day a transferable vote system, Le Pen, the father, would never have been elected to the second round.
Mm-hmm.
He only was in the runoff because the votes were so spread. So in that sense, it's the French system is a weird. It does not have the advantages that you're describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is a big advantage, though, that you can vote for who you want to and not worry about excuse me, and not worry about what your neighbors are voting for, who they're voting for.
Yes.
Because it doesn't matter in the end. There's no need for strategic voting under an STV system. Another great outcome of this, I think, is that you actually get more political variety. So, for example, under the first past the post system, where most people are familiar with because it's mostly probably what you're under, it generally leads to a two-party system. It generally leads to people using votes strategically to get the not the other candidate solution. I don't like candidate X so much that I will vote for the most popular alternative to him to avoid him getting into office. So, or her. So,
let's not be sexist.
Oh, let's not be sexist. Or them.
Or Xir.
Or Zir. So generally you have this kind of voting which leads to these two massive candidates who are basically battling each other, or these two massive parties which are basically battling each other. And it causes actually polarization because it means like eventually over the course of many cycles of elections, to just keep grabbing those little bits and pieces of voters, the candidates almost have to be the polar opposite of each other to get the votes. And there's not really much room for ideological kind of, variety, I guess. But under the single transferable vote, you can vote for whoever you want, and it without thinking of who else is out there. And so it does lead to more political variety and more kind of ideological variety in being elected into parliamentary systems. So, for example, here in Ireland, you can see, comparing it to America, for example, you have basically two parties. I don't know, is there anyone from the Greens or the Libertarians in Congress at the moment? No, there isn't. Not even one.
Not even one.
So that's kind of crazy considering they make up probably, 5% of the population? Is it?
If you sum them up based on the latest election, that's the results that we saw.
So, yeah.
But if you were to... But that's because there was only one round.
Mm-hmm.
So, strategic votes and all that. If you were to run a poll today and, ask what is your favorite political party, I'm not sure you would get a number as low as 5% for sure.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There are people who vote for certain political systems, like we said, but they do that because they don't want to give their vote to the other guy. They don't want to give the win to the other guy. So... But
again, France is a very example to compare it to, because we have a system that's similar to America when it comes to electing the member of what we call the National Assembly. So that's our parliament essentially, and it is you have something that gets close to a congressional district, and in each of them, you get a 2-round vote, just like you have for the presidential. So that skews things a lot towards a two-party system, which is interesting because here in Ireland, you have for a given area up to X candidates, and that transferable vote means it's not just the one that gets picked up.
That's a very important part of the single transferable vote, is having large voting areas and large ranges. It means that you can have more political diversity because more people in the area can be represented by multiple candidates. So, for example, if we had very small areas that were, let's say, there was one dominant ideology and there was only one candidate who could be elected, then that ideology would win out, or that party would win out. Whereas if you have much larger ranges, you even with one ideology that maybe has 50% of the vote, or one party that has 50% of the vote, the other 50%, if there was, let's say, 4 candidates, it would mean probably two candidates would be part of the dominant party, but then the other 2 candidates would probably be of a different party. So you would have more ideological kind of
diversity.
Variety or diversity, yeah. Which you can definitely see in Ireland here. Here we have, I think, 5 or 6 parties that have at least 5% of the vote. There's a few that have a lot more. There's a few that have a bit of less. We have a huge amount of independent candidates as well.
Yes,
which
you were
something
saying.
is just doesn't seem to happen in first past the post. You don't tend to get independent candidates.
Oh no, absolutely not.
No.
In France, at least, it's I don't even know if I can think of one. As I was saying about, so in our National Assembly, we do have candidates from other political parties, be it the National Front, the Greens, even the Communists have some, but definitely not something that if you look at the percentages. Definitely does not look what a nationwide survey would show you.
We even in our local elections, we use the first past the post. The single transferable vote, and
so you mean for electing for city councils?
Exactly, yeah. And in my local area, my local county council, even I remember during my vote, you have the entire political spectrum representative. You have a libertarian right next to what is essentially everything is a communist but in name, on the same city council, which is is not really seen anywhere else, which I think is great. It's actually, I'm very pro it. I wouldn't call myself a libertarian and I wouldn't call myself a communist, but it's great that their voices are at least being represented. So there you go. And it's a fairly good system when you can get both libertarians and communists to agree. Because
smaller voices do generally agree. And this is, we were talking about America, this is something that is driven by an alliance of including the Greens and the Libertarians. Are saying, look, we disagree on virtually everything, but at least we agree to say electoral reforms are badly needed. One thing that also you were mentioning off air that's interesting is that you're kind of solving the whole idea of gerrymandering.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of, I think in the States, I know there is a lot of gerrymandering that goes on.
A lot.
Quite a lot. In the States have voting districts. And those voting districts are redrawn quite regularly, I believe, to ensure that candidates kind of have an easy win on their hands every election cycle. Whereas if you had a larger range, for example, just say the state, you just have the state and you'd have, I don't know, let's say 5 Congress representatives going from that state. Everyone in the state would just vote, and as long as that candidate got over the 20% margin, because that would be the amount of candidates divided by the quota, by the number of electorates, the citizens that can vote. You would then, if they got over that quota, then they would be elected. And the last person, obviously, if there's one seat left and there isn't a
clear, if you don't pass the cutoff mark,
if you still don't hit that 20% quota, whoever's the most popular gets that seat.
Yes.
Yeah, at the end of it. So it's good in that way, because that means you don't have to worry about your representatives redrawing districts to match their.
Well, it's a bit harder to redraw.
Yeah, it's a bit harder to redraw a state line. I think a lot more people don't really care about districts being redrawn, I don't feel. But I'd say you would care a lot if you were in Nevada and then 2 years' time, it comes around to the next election, you are in California, you're paying completely different state taxes, you're paying completely different local taxes, you're paying different
even closer
laws.
to home. If you think of what's happening in Athlone. with the ongoing war to know if the west part of Athlone is part of Westmeath or Roscommon.
Yeah.
That's not the sort of things that go unnoticed.
Yeah. You have in Ireland we don't do it by county. I wish we did, but we don't. There are some reasons for that which I can understand. So for example, in very large and dense population areas like Dublin, for example, they tend to split it up.
Which makes sense.
This makes sense.
Dublin makes up for a third of the country's population.
Yeah, so I think that's fair enough. And the districts aren't redrawn that often, so it's quite rare for them to be redrawn.
But it's more to do with Ireland being heavily centralised in Dublin.
That too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit.
So, yeah. What else? What were we talking about? Sorry. The another advantage then is that another thing that I've noticed is that the STV system seems to be catching on very slowly in other areas, which is great. So, for example, in local kind of elections in small places like in the UK, or in what I've seen a really great sign is in universities to perform university elections for representatives on.
Oh, you mean, for example, let's say student unions, those sort of things?
Yeah, in university elections for student unions, if you have multiple representatives, you seem to have an STV vote system going out now. I've noticed that in universities in Ireland, and it's starting to creep into universities in the UK as well, which is really great because the UK is actually a first past the post system also. So if you can get even just, familiarizing college students with the idea of STV, that would be really a great step forward. And I've noticed in Maine, in the United States, they're doing their local elections now via STV as well.
Okay.
So it's catching on in other places.
Yeah.
Which is great because I really think it is a far superior voting system than first past the post.
Now, that's interesting because the closest I can think of in terms of comparisons would be what we have for the European Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Because the European Parliament is a list system, as opposed to the so you vote for entire lists and not candidates. So that's how they ensure that the Parliament is representative of different political forces. So that's the closest that we have to my knowledge.
Okay, I'm not as familiar with that, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, well, it's fairly straightforward in a sense. So it's a single vote, but you vote for a list, and essentially, depending on the result that you make, the list will have, if you do X%, that means that you have this number of candidates that you can choose that you can get a parliament seat. So the list would already tell you, well, here's our first and second and third and fourth. And, if we get 3, you already know who are the 3 that are going to get elected.
Okay.
But it is more associated to the party itself. So you kind of stay in a party logic and you don't have... I mean, what I find really interesting about the Irish transferable vote system is the share of independence. That's absolutely enormous. A third, you were telling me.
I don't think it's a third. I think it's 20-ish%. I think
20%, yeah.
Which is, it's still massive though.
It is massive.
And it's a big group. And then sometimes you have independents then that will kind of focus around a certain issue and try and get it through. And they actually, because there's so many independents that can agree on certain issues, you can actually get like actual political clout to get legislation through. So just because they're independents doesn't mean they're useless as in terms of a voting bloc in a parliament as well. So it's really good. So as another thing about the single transferable vote is I kind of see first past the post. Some places have a kind of a mix. They have multiple rounds of first past the post, which is essentially the same idea as single transferable vote, but the issue, France do this. They have 2 rounds of voting, so it's a very minimal kind of first past the very minimal kind of single transferable vote system. But an issue I have with this now, I have no data to back this up, but I can imagine that there would be a more political apathy. It's hard enough to get people out to the polls once. To ask them to come out twice seems like a lot of hassle.
Especially when it's not a national election.
Yeah.
Because everybody right now is talking about the French national election. But let me tell you, when it's about local election, participation rates are more around 50%.
Oh yeah. Oh well,
So-
that's actually wonderful because I know in Ireland, local elections are incredibly underrepresented. I think you have like
You mean in terms of participation or
participation,
Yeah.
absolutely. Even though it is a single transferable vote, local councils don't have that much
Okay.
sway here. So the political apathy, it's you can
Yeah.
you
But
can
at least,
you
yeah,
can win a local election in this country if you have like a 2,000 votes. You know,
Yeah.
out of a population of maybe 50,000 for the local council.
Yeah.
You know,
But as you were saying, at least it's just the one vote.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go in people's house and pull them to the voting booth 9 times in a row.
yeah. It's exactly, yeah. Because I feel, I don't know, you've lived in a country that has multiple rounds of first past post voting. Do you feel there's less political apathy
it's
to
only
get out
2.
to the poll?
Yeah.
It's only 2 still, but do
you
you feel
would-
there's, is there less of a willingness to go out and vote for the second time, especially maybe if there's candidates that you're not too thrilled with?
I don't have any numbers on the top of my head, but as far as I remember, those would be similar numbers. Obviously, slightly lower because if whoever is your favorite candidate didn't get elected,
Yeah.
then you might not want to. You might feel like the 2 candidates remaining are not to your taste. So the participation rate drops a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's not like it's half. It still is within the same ballpark.
Okay. So maybe if it's only 2 rounds, it's not that much.
But 2 rounds is just
Yeah.
2, and I would feel like if you
Yeah.
had a third round, you would see a much more significant, or maybe people would skip the step in the middle. Maybe
Maybe.
the second round would have very little participation, and only the third had some. But that's definitely a valid concern.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
So,
Now, let me play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Because, and this is not a criticism only of single transferable vote, but of more representative system, that the benefit of, if you look at, for example, the French system, and I'm saying that because that's exactly how the debate is, because it is a topic of debate. It's been going on for years and years in France. Should we have a more proportional system? You would have people saying, well, yes, but that means that you have more marginal, fringe, crazy, or maybe not necessarily in favor of traditional, democratic values type of party. The National Front would definitely have a lot more power than it has today. So what would be your response if someone came out to you and say, well, does that mean, if you look at the UK, it's mostly dominated by Labour and the Tories. It does keep, to a certain extent, UKIP at bay.
You're absolutely right, it does. If you were to look at the last election under STV, UKIP would have gained far more seats than they would have. UKIP gained 13% of the popular vote, and I think they only got a couple seats, barely any. But it's the issue with that is people who say that, I think, have some legitimate concerns, which I completely agree with, but at the same time, they're not for representative democracy. It seems like you're almost in favor of some sort of kind of dictatorship light kind of thing. It's like
enlightened
yeah,
democracy.
It's a bit of a dictatorship light. I think you shouldn't have to worry about these parties going against democracy. If you have, again, I'm against the idea of a full-on democracy. I think the best system is a representative democracy backed by a constitution that is pro-democracy, pro the individual's rights, and as long as that constitution upholds those rights, you shouldn't have to worry. I could be very naive in saying that now, but coming from a country that has changed its constitution nearly 30 times, I think, to this point, in less than 100 years. So,
well, in fairness, though, you didn't have a great constitution to start with.
That is very true.
And it still is today.
It's
not. I mean,
not fit for purpose.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to say make the Irish Constitution great again, because it was not great in the first place.
Yeah. So, but I think I understand the concerns that people raise about that.
Yeah. So you're saying it's not a problem of electoral system, it's a problem of checks and balances.
Exactly. You need the correct checks and balances, and if they are in place and if they are enforced,
You should
then
not be
you
afraid.
shouldn't have to worry about other candidates and their ideologies.
Let's say, for example, our good friend Justin Barrett of
Yes, of Identity Ireland.
Identity Ireland.
Yeah, he has some views that I would be kind of disgusted by.
I can see why.
He wants to throw out all of the... I forget exactly the wording, but basically anyone who doesn't seem Irish enough. Is that a nice way to put it? Do you remember the exact wording he used?
I would have to check.
But yeah.
I know he was... I don't remember his exact wording.
Yeah.
I do remember he was not very fond of the non-Irish
people
and products, and he's very consistent there. He's opposed
ethnically
to...
Irish, I think is what he said.
Yeah, he's opposed to trade as much as he's opposed to immigration, so I have to give him that.
Yeah. Under, if you have a constitution which backs some kind of basic human rights and some basic individual rights and upholds the system with which we elect people, then I think you shouldn't have to worry too much about that. Now, if you were in a country where you didn't have that, then yeah, sure, I would be worried. I would definitely be worried. But
now,
I think under Ireland, I think we're okay, especially because you need to change to actually change the constitution in Ireland, you need a referendum. So
Yes.
it's not like the government can make in other countries where the government can just change its constitution willy-nilly. You actually need the consent of the people to change the constitution. So I feel more happy with that system.
Yes, and to go to your to add to your point as well, it's not that you elect the prime minister directly through that system. In Ireland, we elect the representatives who themselves choose the prime minister.
Yes.
So that would not necessarily affect.
Yeah, this is something people find really weird. We actually don't choose our leader. Our leader is called the Taoiseach. He's our prime minister, and we don't actually elect him directly. We elect people to our parliament, Dáil, and they then elect the person. So it's usually the biggest party in the Dáil will then elect the Taoiseach or the prime minister, our leader.
So there is not as much of a risk of an extremely unpopular mainstream candidate being somehow overrun by an extremely popular fringe candidate.
Exactly. Unless there's some kind of...
Because you would still have some kind of a coalition.
Yeah, you would still have some kind of coalition to form a government. So
yes,
and that coalition would then be elected. And in that case, generally you'd have, if you have a coalition, they would be working together. And so yeah, you wouldn't have to worry too much about fringe candidates getting elected to a prime minister status. So yeah,
interesting.
So that's kind of what I wanted to say about single transferable vote. Do you have any other questions or?
Personally, no. I think that, but in fairness, you're sort of preaching to the choir. I think we've established that I'm not necessarily too fond of the French electoral system. So I'll invite if our listeners have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments for sure.
Oh, absolutely. We'll try and answer them to the best of our ability. So I think that's all we wanted to say. If you guys could like the video and subscribe if you want more.
Share it with your friends.
Share it on Facebook and Twitter. We'll give you a shout out if you add us on Twitter at Hipster Capitalist and at Aaron Buki. So
Right. Thanks very much, and see you for the next episode.
Talk to you. Bye.